Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Divas, Diamonds, and Dollars podcast. We bring you the key success principles for business, personal finance, and leadership to empower you with the tools and strategies to help you live your best life. We invite you to lean in for possibly the best conversation you have had all week. Now, today, we're super excited to bring you an installment from our signature Trailblazer Interview series as we sit down and take a deep success dive with today's superstars who are doing big things, and by that, I mean bold, inspiring, and gifted things, and changing the world that we live in. So I'm pleased to introduce to you Sandy Rosenthal, who is the founder of the nonprofit Levees.org, whose focus is educating the public that flooding of New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina was due to federal engineering mistakes, not naughty Mother Nature. Now, Sandy is also the author of the book, Words Whispered in Water, Why the Levees Broke in Hurricane Katrina, which is about how, against all odds, she altered the national narrative about the flooding disaster. Now, for those efforts and more, Sandy has been honored with numerous awards, most recently including Outstanding Social Entrepreneur of the Year from Tulane University and Most Influential Woman from Mount Holyoke College. Rosenthal is an advocate for the 62% of the American population living in counties protected by levees. Sandy's powerful message is bringing to light a mostly unknown yet dangerous situation in many parts of our country, and she's an inspiration on how to truly mobilize citizen participation. Sandy, so excited to meet you. I always root for the underdog, and yours is a particularly inspiring story of how the little guy can prevail. Now, I'm sure our listeners can really learn from your experiences.
Well, thank you so much. And something that you said really resonated with me just now. It's how, the little guy, often it's the people who are harmed and hurt and struggling. It's often the burden is on their backs. Too often it works out that way. But I appreciate you pointing that out.
No, absolutely. Now, since I always root for the underdog, I couldn't wait to sit down with you. And here's the thing. I would say that unless one lives near open water, at least that's my experience, they're not likely to be aware of levees, much less know what they do. Now, for example, I didn't realize that the landlocked city that I live in had a history of flooding. Of course, I didn't find that out till after I bought the house. But I thought that was in the past, first of all, but until two things happen. So the first one, of course, is our trusty GPS. That will get you in trouble all the time. My GPS led me astray one day as I was driving back from somewhere, and I took a nervous twilight drive along several levee back roads that I actually didn't know existed. And more recently, I actually found out that there was a new funding push to reinforce the levees in San Joaquin County, which is where I live. So, I didn't know this was a problem, and I bet that's the case for many of our listeners. So, but I will say that, I as I was getting ready for today's conversation, I realized, dusting off the cobwebs a bit, I think there was honorable mention during school, like maybe, don't know if that was high school or elementary, but I do remember hearing the words before. So I'm not horribly unfamiliar, but I just didn't know that they were everywhere. That's probably your experience, I would imagine.
That 62% of the American population, that's almost 2/3 of the people in this country, representing millions and millions of people, live in counties where there's levees. And I guarantee you're not alone with not really thinking about it. And really, why should you? When you drive across a federal highway or a federal bridge, you're not worried it's going to break and fall.
Well, I am. I'm just that nervous.
Well, maybe you should be a little. Yeah. But most people, this is America. Why should we be worried about our federal bridges? But it turns up, unfortunately, that there is some cause for concern, especially as we now know what the Biden administration is pouring more money into improving our infrastructure. But again, back to how many of us live in danger of levee failure. It's shockingly high.
It comes under the heading of scandalous, honestly, and then to have people push back on this infrastructure funding, I do not understand the logic behind that. But I want to say that I feel that yours is an unusual story, so I want to let you share it, of course. So I tried to do a little bit of homework and find out more about you, but what I did not see in my brief search was your background in particular. So like, are you an engineer by trade, or what really led you down this road?
Well, that's the really interesting thing. I mean, I had no special training. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an attorney. I had no political experience, but I had to use all those things. I had to use some politics. I had to use engineering and public speaking, and I had to use these things to get the word out about why the levees broke. And so that's, to your listeners, that should be a real big eye opener. No, you don't have to have special training. No, to mobilize people. You don't have to have special training to beat the big guys. It comes from within, and it comes from a love of your community, be your community, your neighborhood, be it your town, or be it your city, or in some cases, even your country. You know, it's the love of your community is all you need to push you ahead. So that's why you couldn't find any experience. I didn't have any.
Well, I think we can't say that anymore. You know, for me, or one of the things that I try and promote to my community is, you know, being able to help one to find your cause that you want to get behind, and of course, letting your voice be heard. So why was it important to you to let others know, I guess, that it was faulty construction instead of Mother Nature that was the biggest factor in the massive destruction caused by Hurricane Katrina? Why did this become your platform, if you will? I know you said love of community. Were you in the path of danger? I don't know. Could you speak a little bit more about how this came to be?
I'd be happy to. And it's a really good question. The disaster for me feels like it was yesterday. It actually was almost 17 years ago. 17 years ago, the entire city of New Orleans was either on their rooftops or evacuated from the city. 80% of the city was flooded. If you either lost everything or 80% of what you had. Even if your house didn't flood, you lost your school, you lost your church, you lost your doctor's office, you lost all your favorite places to go eat, all gone, in a blink of an eye in a couple of hours. Right away, the narrative, the people responsible for this disaster, which was the federal government, the Army Corps of Engineers, started telling the American people, well, they're all corrupt down there in New Orleans. Well, they stole the money for the levees. Katrina was a huge storm. Well, in Mississippi it was, but not in New Orleans. We caught the edges of the hurricane.
Okay.
And then the other narrative that the Army Corps was putting out there was that, all of New Orleans is below sea level, like the Holland, which it's not. 50% of New Orleans is at or well above sea level. So this narrative was being put out there. I was fortunate. I didn't flood. And because of that, I was able to read and study and listen to the radio and watch the news. And it quickly became apparent to me that the people of America were being fed a bill of goods, a false bill of goods. In other words, a false story. Why does this matter? Well, who was going to help us? Only the federal government could help us. So if the federal government believed we brought this disaster upon ourselves, what kind of help were we going to get? So that is why I began to push to get the story out. But I realized quickly I couldn't do it alone. Even if God himself had come down from the heavens and told me the true story, I couldn't have done it alone. I would have had to get others with me. I would have had to get a group of people with me to get the true story out there. And that's what I started doing. And I'm still doing it to this day. Although we've largely achieved our mission of changing the narrative, because now, 17 years out, thank goodness, major media does now have the story correctly, and which is the reason that the city flooded was because of mistakes made by engineers that worked for the federal government.
And so you mentioned one thing I wanted to expand a little bit on, because, as you said, we can't really all do it by ourselves, although some of us, we insist on trying. But, you have to magnify your voice and, as you say, get other people involved. And I'm going to have to say, it feels like, you really excelled, if you will, in rallying the troops behind you, which served to amplify your voice to get, get the word out. So was this part of your strategic plan all along, or how really did you get others involved?
I'm happy to share that with you. So to start, I realized I need to get the word out, but well, how am I going to do that? I wasn't even living in New Orleans. So it was my 15-year-old son that gave me the idea, Mom, if you'll come up with a mission and we can create this organization. My son, 15 years old, had just turned 15. He said, I'll put together a website.
Okay.
And I said, okay. And this was 17 years ago. The whole online world was just pretty much just getting started,
right,
of getting things done online. A lot of people didn't even have email at that time, if you can imagine that. AOL was the
we remember
email
AOL,
of the time.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So my son put together a website and I created a mission. And the mission is that the flooding of New Orleans was caused by engineering mistakes, not a storm. And I thought, well, I need more than that. We need followers, as I mentioned before. So I wrote a petition, and the petition asked President Bush to keep his promise to build back the levees bigger and stronger. And I put this petition on the website, and the old-fashioned way just forwarded this petition to all of our family and all of our friends. Overnight, we had 200 signatures, which is a lot for 17 years ago. 200 signatures, and that kind of put us on the map, so to speak. And then from there we scheduled our first event, which was the rally on the levee, which is right at the Army Corps of Engineers building, where we demanded the truth about the flooding. And again, Congress, these are the people that decided whether funding shall be released to help us rebuild. They are the people that decide, and those are the people that needed to hear from us. So we did our rally on the levee. And after that, well, the rest is history, but that's what put us on the map. And that's what gave us, we had to pick a name, levees.org. And at that time, no one even knew what a levee was.
Exactly. Foreign language. So, and then you've shown a lot of perseverance, people will get up in arms and they will try, but they don't always stick to it. Now, how did you find the strength or the inner moxie, if you will, to keep pushing forward? Because I'm sure there was resistance. So what kind of resistance did you meet? And what are some of the ways you were able to keep going, if you will, despite the pushback? Because I know you got pushback.
Absolutely. And I was surprised by the pushback. I really thought, who in their right mind would be against safe levees? Who could have a problem with that? What I did not count on is how powerful the engineering community could be. And the engineering community actually tried to protect itself from the things that I was saying. And the engineering community banded together. The Army Corps of Engineers banded with an elite trade group called the American Society of Civil Engineers. And they worked together to keep the truth from the American people. But all I had to do is, and this is something your listeners need to be aware of. You don't have to know all the answers, but you do have to ask the questions.
Exactly.
And you keep asking and you keep asking until you get a good answer.
You got to be that squeaky wheel. Yep.
And first they ignore you, and then they start to be mean to you, and then you win. Okay. And they all play by the same playbook, but you just got to keep persevering. And how did I not burn out? I did that by surrounding myself with people, and I could trade off. Here, why don't you go to this neighborhood group meeting, and perhaps maybe you would write a press release. And because if you try to do everything, you will burn up in flames. You have to work with other people. Were there times I relegated something and they didn't do as good a job as I would have? Of course there was. Of course there was. But you can't let that stop you from delegating, relegating, and you have to bring in other people and surround yourself with other people. And I do want to point this out. Once you open your mouth to get the truth out, experts will come to you. Really? Like that's when an expert engineer came to me to offer his help. That's when an attorney came to me and offered his help. All of this pro bono. That's when artists, the artists can create beautiful beautiful images for you to help make your message more interesting.
Right. Visual messaging.
Everybody loves a picture.
Yeah.
Okay. Artists came to me and offered their work pro bono. And so but it had to begin with speaking up and using that voice that you were given the day you were born.
Well, that is really, and I mean, logically speaking or thinking, you would have to have someone to be able to speak the language. So to have an engineer come on board and have an attorney come on board, that had to give you a huge boost to your cause and legitimacy / credibility. So I imagine things that really took off after that. I don't know how it could be otherwise.
I will mention, it always takes a little longer than you thought it would take, and it'll be a little harder than you thought it would be. But it was still worth the effort and still worth the work. I think I should tell your listeners what our big crowning jewel success was.
Okay.
The crowning success was when it became obvious to me and my group that the people fighting us were all quoting the very first levee investigation study that was ever done, that was right there near you at UC Berkeley.
Oh,
okay. This study was done by wonderful people, no bad reflection on any of them, but they came to a wrong conclusion. They were under I'm going to start that over again. They had a shoestring budget and they were under an insane deadline. And we had this massive disaster. It's impossible to wrap your head around this disaster in as little as 9 months. And that's all they had, or 8 months, excuse me, to do this study. It was the first one, and they came to the wrong conclusion, and they wrongly concluded that the people of New Orleans, our local officials, are responsible for the flooding, that we prevented the Army Corps from building the proper system.
Really?
That was their conclusion.
So this was a study on the effects of Katrina, though? That's what the study was for, to determine?
That was the study. Yes, this study was called it's called the ILIT, ILIT, which stood for Levee. ILIT. I'm gonna have to look it up, but it was at UC California, Berkeley. ILIT. Investigation Levee something team. Okay.
Sure.
So anyhow, but again, they came to a wrong conclusion.
Right.
Well, the people fighting me kept quoting that years later, 6, 7, 8 years later. And I realized that the people who wrote that investigation needed to retract it and write a new paper with the true information in it. So we met with them, my group met with them, wonderful people, and they understood the harm that was done by their wrong investigation. And they talked to people who they thought they could trust. They admitted they made a mistake, which is wonderful. There are not many people on this planet who will admit a mistake. So, but they did, and they wrote a new paper, and it was called, it was published in this journal. Water Policy. It's the official journal of the World Water Council. And it retracted that wrong conclusion about the people of New Orleans and the officials in New Orleans, and put out the truth, which is that the Army Corps of Engineers had made a tragic mistake when they were looking for ways to save money on steel. They made a mistake, and they thought they only needed to drive steel sheet piling down 16 feet instead of 50. 1.6 instead of 5.0. It was a mistake. 1,800 people died within a few hours, hundreds more afterward due to trauma, relocation, heart attacks in their attics. It was awful. It was a horrible catastrophe, which is why I worked 10 years. But after this study was published, the New York Times did a story about it. And ever since then, the media properly refers to the flooding of New Orleans as an engineering disaster. So it took me 10 years. Hopefully, for your listeners out there taking on their communities, that's an unusually long time. And I took on a federal organization, okay? But we succeeded. And you can too. Whoever your big guys are in your neighborhood, you can win too.
Well, that's got to be an inspiration. I mean, people are conditioned, if you will, for instant gratification. And this would not be the case when you're fighting the big boys. The instant gratification seldom happens because they know they have more time, deeper pockets, and probably louder voices, if you will. So, in looking at the leadership you displayed, I would say that, many people avoid the limelight. They fail to step forward for one reason or the other, probably a lot of doubt. Now, don't know how much you've thought about this, but I would say that you've definitely honed your leadership chops by stepping up and stepping out. Now, what was it? Somebody must have told you, or maybe you already knew. What was it that made you such a strong leader in this regard on this charge? Or maybe in general, maybe this is how you always are.
This is going to shock your listeners, but I'm born profoundly deaf in one ear and severely in the other. Oh. I also had a severe Boston dialect. Okay. So these are things that I was born with that have been a challenge my entire life, but I met those challenges. I learned how to read lips very, very well. Oh. And I took speech therapy because when you hear differently from everyone else, you speak differently. Mm-hmm. I'm speaking what I hear. Okay. Here's an example. Chicken and chair, they sound the same to me. So when I was a little girl, I said chicken. I love chicken. Okay. So that's just one small example. So here I am. But by the time I took on this challenge of straightening out the story of the levee breaches, I'd already taught myself to speak and taught myself to understand people. Mm-hmm. And after that, everything's pretty easy when you've taken on a big challenge. And it was a big challenge. So I'm very excited about that. And these things gave me courage to speak out. They gave me courage to do what I'm doing right here now, to be having this, to be a guest on your podcast right now. These things gave me the courage. Okay, so that was me. And as far as the strength to go on, again, that comes from, all I have to do is look out my window and I can see people who lost everything. Mm-hmm. Okay. Or all I have to do is look at my iPhone, look at a picture, and I'll see somebody who might have lost a relative in the flooding. I mean, this catastrophe was so large that it was impossible to not know somebody, either know someone who died or mm-hmm. or know someone whose family member died. Mm-hmm. So that was my whatever that word is to describe how I became so engaged. That was my engagement.
Well, I would say that having overcome, as you say, the lack of hearing and the speech challenges, I mean, so those, I would probably say definitely to the, for most of us, that's a huge accomplishment. And then, so I can see how that would empower you, because like, oh, well, look what I already did. So the rest of this is a walk in the park. So, why not? And you probably answered it to some degree, but I mean, it's also important that you have belief in yourself and your abilities. And it's kind of a challenge. I'm not sure that's the right word. Is it when people have to look outward for, what is it called? Oh my goodness, not recognition, but they want to get the approval of others instead of, learning it from or seeing it and feeling it from within. So, I always encourage people to believe in themselves, but sometimes it's, they're just not hearing it. A validation, that's what it was. They're looking for external validation. Mm-hmm. But, you've demonstrated this several times over, and, you've worked hard all your life, it sounds like. So have you always had this strong belief, or did you find your confidence growing over time?
To this day, I'm shocked at the person I've become after the levee breach event. So while I took that speech therapy I talked about when I was 40, I was 48 when the levees broke. Okay. And the levee breach event transformed me from the person that I was. I'd reached a point in my life where I used to work the proverbial 9-to-5 job. By the time the levee breach event happened, I was down to just one child at home. I was working part-time. So it would be safe to call myself semi-retired. Okay. So I was semi-retired, enjoying playing tennis with my part-time work that I was doing. I had just one child at home at the time. I had no reason to think that would ever change. And then the levees broke, and I became transformed into something that's called a disaster resilience leader. And these are people who take on leadership who never in 1,000 years would have ever thought they would ever lead anything, much less something very important. So I'm one of them. Would I have ever selected it? No. Would I have ever thought I could do it? No. But in life, often the things you become, or the things you become interested in, find you rather than the other way around.
True.
They fall in your lap one day.
Sometimes mostly uninvited, but here they are.
Mostly uninvited.
So I'm going to suggest that you have very much been the little engine that could. So what advice would you give to others facing a big challenge or their own David and Goliath type of situation? What advice do you give to someone who's, faced with this burden or this challenge?
Listen to everybody. And you never know who might have gems of advice for you. Give them an opportunity to listen. And even if you can't give them that opportunity, make sure that someone on your team gives them that opportunity. And in time, you'll begin to learn who just likes to talk and who has real advice to offer. But in the beginning, you really need to listen to everybody. And the people who will come to you and offer their help will come when you least expect it. One of the best things that could have happened to me, I got an email on Thanksgiving Day of all things that ended up being an email that was a big boost for Levees.org's a big boost for Levees.org's credibility. Because it had to do with that trade group I told you about. That trade group that was fighting us actually threatened to sue my group if we didn't shut up.
Really?
They threatened us, me, my little fledgling grassroots group, and a bunch of high school students for a video we had created.
Oh, okay.
Those high school students went to their teacher the following Monday and said, "Ms. Cobb, am I going to be sued?" They're 16 years old. That made me so angry. So that help that came on Thanksgiving Day was a law firm from California called Cooley. Are you familiar with that group? Cooley?
I don't think so.
Cooley, that's okay. But they were in California and they offered to help us pro bono when they saw that we were doing. So, the help will come, but it will never come if you don't open your mouth. So open your mouth and start talking, and then the help will come. And again, listen to that help. Had I never opened that email, I never would have gotten that advice. And I can give many examples where help came in an email. It's a good thing I looked at it, because right there in the attachment was this big time information. Remember that statistic you already mentioned? 62% of the American population live by levees. I found that out in by the way, FYI, from the executive director of the now closed LSU Flood Control Center. So FYI, well, I opened it, and that's when I got that statistic. But this is big,
That's
and
huge.
and then it's huge. I mean, and it you know what it does? It makes this issue and something everybody should care about.
Exactly. It's not just a local. When things are local, people go, it's not my problem. Yeah. But when you hear that kind of number, hopefully, it kind of makes people start looking around and paying a little bit more attention. Because, we have our blinders on, we're just busy. We're just kind of like, distract phone, the media, internet, whatever. Wait, there's a levee in my backyard, so
now you've got my attention.
Hopefully you've got some eyeballs and some ears.
And then the only other thing I could mention is you've got to believe in yourself. This is because the criticism will come in some form. Those that don't want your truth out are going to criticize. So I would look at that criticism as free information. They're giving you information when they criticize, and believe in your heart, you know what you're doing is the right thing, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
You do have to stay the course, and there will be those people trying to chip away. That is for sure. Now, I asked you this earlier, but, as a host of your own podcast, Beat the Big Guys podcast, first of all, that's a very fun descriptive name. It kind of makes people, kind of really, okay, well, what's coming up next? Now, you help others find their voice. How did that idea come about?
to do the podcast?
Right. Specific on this topic, because it's got to be, hopefully, I'm sure, inspiring and informational.
Okay, I'll be honest.
Okay. All right.
In my 16 years of working on getting the truth out about the flood, I've been interviewed more times than I can count. Okay. And I have been asked, sometimes it feels like the same question over and over.
I imagine so. It's tough.
And I've always had this fantasy of me asking the questions.
Okay.
And me asking, why did you start this? What drives you? What makes you keep at it day in and day out? And so what I'm doing is I'm living a fantasy, but I also have to admit, I discovered something that this interview is a lot more work for you, the interviewer, than me, the guest. So I found out, it's a lot of work to prepare, to have your questions ready, to do the research. So I found out now I'm on the other side of the table, so to speak, now that I'm the interviewer. But again, this is a fantasy that I've had, and it's been a lot of fun because I've learned a lot by the quote unquote seat of my pants. And it's been fun sharing that. It's been a lot of fun for me.
Well, that's good. So how long have you had it? I mean, I took a quick peek yesterday, but I only was able to kind of get part of one of your interviews. Have you been doing it a while, or how long?
I launched my podcast, Beat the Big Guys, in June of 2021.
Okay.
And I just recorded my 39th episode.
Wowzer, you're almost caught up to me. I'm in my second season, but good for you. We'll do a mutual applause.
Good for us.
There we go. How funny. It is funny. I do enjoy talking to other people and getting, different insights and perspectives. So again, trying to do the old homework thing. I did read recently that the NOLA levees have since been rebuilt and fortified, as the article stated, and that they actually held during Hurricane Ida, which I understand is not as powerful as Hurricane Katrina, but still, progress, it sounds like. So what are your thoughts on that? Did they do the right thing? And how does this rebuild impact the work that you do going forward?
There's a big difference in New Orleans now that the levees broke, and we all know now why they broke and who's responsible. So there's been a whole change in the way we think here. And now when there's a storm coming, we either get out, and if we do stay, we have a plan. For example, let me start that over again. While I evacuated, I did so only because I had to have perfect internet the next day. Hurricane Ida hit on the 29th of August. I had to have perfect internet on the 30th for my work and my husband. So we evacuated out of convenience, not because we felt worried about the new levee system. But my son, that same 15-year-old who's now 31, he stayed here.
Oh.
And he stayed here at my house. And the reason he could stay here was because we had built, and so had many other people who live here, a battery. We had batteries installed that could store solar power. So they get the solar power, the big batteries store the energy, and you can live off this energy. You can run an AC unit for a bedroom and a bath, and you could also power the refrigerator and the freezer. And you could live indefinitely on it. Now you wouldn't want to forever because it's just 2 rooms in the house. But my son and his partner and the dog stayed here for 5 days here in my house. And a lot of other people had a similar type of system built. But also this new system, this flood protection system built since Hurricane Katrina, is the one that should have been here when Katrina arrived 17 years ago. We should have had that system. It's a much, much, much better system. You won't find a single expert who will agree it's the proper system, the absolute right system, best system, but it's head and shoulders better than the one that we had 17 years ago. And yes, it did hold up, even though I need to point out Hurricane Ida came from a different direction.
Oh, is it right?
A different direction. And the intensity was different. The mayor of New Orleans did not order of an evacuation.
Oh, really?
That's right. It's because the storm came from a different location. West of the city got battered pretty badly. And some of the people who live in New Orleans, west of the city. They got some pretty strong wind. It was scary, but beyond tree limbs being down, it was a moderate event. Thank goodness.
Who said who puts hurricane and moderate in the same sentence? That's what I want to know.
I know. I'm obviously someone that has hurricanes a lot. We have strong ones and moderate ones, and we have weak ones. Yeah, but that you raise a good point. It's like moderate tornadoes.
Yeah, no. And especially now with climate change, because, I'm in California. I've been here, wow, a very long time. I guess that's about 40 years. And of course, I'm kind of like, okay, where can I go? But there's really nowhere to go. Everything, it seems like every part of the country has some particular type of disaster we don't really want to live with or deal through.
Fires, tornadoes, earthquakes, dust storms, terrible lightning storms that they're doing terrible damage. Yeah, it seems like almost everywhere. It's true. It's true.
Yeah. So I'm still going to be sitting here for another minute because I don't know where to go. How would you say, or have you, has anyone reached out to you with type of feedback, like how your work has impacted others? Do you feel like it's led to permanent or sustainable change?
Are you talking about my work with Levees.org or my podcast?
Probably your work with Levees.
Sure. And how that's impacted others. Yeah. Oh, it definitely has helped people throughout this country wake up and realize that if they live by levee, they need to be paying attention to what's going on with levees in their community. And even though you cannot control what the Army Corps does, just by asking questions and letting the Army Corps of Engineers know that you're paying attention to them, that will change their behavior, not directly, but indirectly it changes their behavior because they are required by law. Let's say you call your Army Corps of Engineers and say you're worried about a crack you see in a levee. Mm-hmm. If you send your comment to the Army Corps, they are required to maintain your comment in a database.
Oh, okay.
It has a cutesy little name, cutesy little letters to it, like Erdic or something like that. And no, it's called Dr. Check. Dr. Check. They're required to write that down in Dr. Check. So when the time comes and there's, heaven forbid, a levee breach there, the record will show that you called the Army Corps and you told them about it. Mm-hmm. And this shines the light on the Corps and puts pressure on the Corps. So, absolutely. This organization definitely helped other people see and also pressured the Army Corps of Engineers to build a good system, the system that we have now.
So as I understand it, and again, first time reader, other than high school, but so are there other organizations across the nation that are also looking at levees? Because I read or otherwise understand that levees is just like Social Security. It's supposed to be like one part of the system, not the whole system of its own that people depend on. There's supposed to be like checks and balances. And I don't know how much of that's being done, but are there, is there anyone else kind of working with you or collaborating with you nationally?
I can answer that question. So there are levees in every state of the nation.
Right.
Federal levees. Every state has what's called a local levee board. Mm-hmm. Okay. And these are the people with whom you would send that comment. Remember that comment I mentioned? Yeah. You see something, you open your mouth, you say something, you contact your levee board, and it's your levee board that tells the Army Corps, and then your comments are submitted. Every single state is this way. Also, after the levee breach event here in New Orleans, every single levee board in the nation is required to go out and check their levees 4 times a year, every single year. And they also, it's all more robust, it's more detailed, and there's better record keeping. So every person in the country, or 62% of the people in the country, are better off and safer because of what happened to us in New Orleans 17 years ago.
Well, you have done so much work, and thankfully that, that someone finally had to pay attention, even if they probably may not have wanted to, but at least, some changes have come forward. So what's ahead for Sandy Rosenthal? What are you excited about, or any new giants to slay? What's coming up next?
Believe it or not, the 20th anniversary in my mind is around the corner. Around the corner. I mean, I'm already planning events for the 20th anniversary of the levee breach event, which is only 3 years away. Well, and so that's what we're planning on. And also the other thing that we're planning on, would you believe that engineering students in this country are not all being taught about this levee breach event that happened here that killed over 1,800 people? No, I called it an event. It was a catastrophe. And engineering students are not being taught about it. So we are leading the push to make it required for every single engineering student in this country to be taught about this disaster before they graduate in something called a capstone course. So that's what we're working on, like literally right now. And then in the very near future, we are going to be holding events for the 20th anniversary, including I never got to do a book launch party. My book came out in the middle of the pandemic.
Oh yeah.
So one of the things we're going to hold is a party, just a party. I live in New Orleans. We party. And so on August 11th, which is 5 years after my book came out, I'm going to have a party to celebrate the launch of my book. But that's just one of the many things we're going to be doing at the 20th anniversary.
Now, and I did see actually that you actually offer tours, which I found that was quite innovative and unique. So good for you. Well, party hard down there in the Nolans, as they say, some folks. I have to practice my Southern accent, Nolans.
Very good.
So we used to spend our summers in Mississippi, not New Orleans, but I finally made it down there a couple of years ago for a conference pre-COVID. But that was the first time I'd done more than drive through. So I was able to stop for 5 minutes. So anywho, as we close, Sandy, how can people reach you or find out more about you and your projects, or maybe even get involved?
Well, I think the best way is to go to my website, which is just my name, sandyrosenthal.net, N-E-T.
Okay.
And from there, if you're interested in the book, if you're interested in the organization, if you're interested in my podcast, you name it, it's all there on that one page.
That's funny. I went to levees.org. I forgot to go to your name site. So I have to make another visit. Well, Sandy, I have actually enjoyed our conversation. I mean, it's an inspiration, like I said, and the fact that, when they call women the weaker sex, you have like, no. So good for you for, representing. And thank you for all your hard work and time that you've put in on this project, because it's been huge and it's beautiful to see the change that you have been able to create. So I hope that makes you very proud.
It does. But you want to know one of the best things? I've just met a new friend, you.
Oh, thank you, Sandy. I sure appreciate it. I'm so glad we got this opportunity. It took a minute, but we finally found each other, and who knows what's coming down the pipeline?
Who knows what's coming down the pipeline?
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.